And the one is from the famous book, Garden of Emunah, as you all know, Rav Arush, translated by Rav Laser Brody. Some very interesting and poignant things that he's written at a timeless, even though this book was written 15 years ago. So it's just a few things and then something from the Chumash. It says, it defines certain character traits which are negative. So it says, stinginess is a direct result from deficiency of emunah. Emunah is the only way to uproot anger, sadness, depression, and jealousy as well. In a like manner, emunah has the power to overcome any negative character or behavior trait. Here's how in a nutshell. So there's only 6 here. It'll be another minute or two.
Sure.
First one is arrogance. With emunah, a person can't be arrogant since he knows that all of his success comes from Hashem. Gluttony. With emunah that Hashem sustains, a person doesn't eat any more than he or she needs. Trust. With emunah, a person has the confidence that Hashem will always provide. Flattery. With emunah, one need not fear or flatter any other human being in the world, no matter how apparently powerful or influential that person may be. Slander. With emunah, one doesn't say a bad word or word about any person. He or she leaves judging other people to Hashem. Being argumentative. When a person believes that all his or her trials and tribulations come from Hashem, he or she doesn't waste energy or arguments and disputes. And the last one, patience. A person with emunah has patience with himself and with others, for he knows that everything in the world goes in accordance with divine providence and Hashem's timetable. And to finish off this chapter, okay, the underlying principles that we discussed, okay, sadness, anger, jealousy, and stinginess are capable of being overcome. Once free of negative emotions, we begin to live sweet and fulfilling lives in this world and in the next. Okay, that's a lifetime's work, but I think that summarizes things very well.
It's a nice book to teach us, Kev, actually.
It's a great, I mean, I've almost finished it, actually.
Okay, well,
I've been lying in my parents' bookcase. It cost 45 Rand.
This must have been in 1920. All right.
Exactly. Okay, I'll do the other thing next time. So I don't want to.
No, I actually like this one. It's a nice change a bit.
And I've got this, just a short thing I found in the comment. We can do that next time, though.
Okay. So, guys, just a couple of things that you need to know, Arthur, you also, is that I know some of you daven in a minion, some of you don't, some of you don't daven. It's okay. Whatever you do, you do. But what I would suggest you do, Arthur, is you make a point of between tonight and tomorrow night, do Ya'aleh V'Yavo, which is the month of Sivan, which you have to do. It takes a few minutes in English. You don't want to do it in Hebrew. And it's part of the benching. So if you have a bit of bread and you add Ya'aleh V'Yavo, it gives you a very, very good blessing for this coming month of Sivan. And we can do with all the blessings we need.
Thank you. You just reminded me, I set my alarm clock for Shachrit. Sorry, I hope it didn't make too much noise. Thank you.
Okay. Guys, Gav, you know what Erev Tavshilin is? Do you know what it is?
Do I know what? Let's repeat that. Erev
Tavshilin. Tavshilin. You know what Erev Tavshilin is? All right, so it's
not by name. Let's see. What is it?
It's not an Eruv. It's Eruv Tashvilin. That's right, Kev. Okay, give it over, Kev.
Eruv Tashvilin.
Yeah, give it over, Kev.
So that's for a Chag. If a Chag goes into, okay, I think you're saying it because Shavuot goes into Shabbos. Shabbos
exactly. So
starts.
Teach Gavin the halachas.
So, and Damon, correct me, if I'm wrong, because I may not have as much knowledge as you on it, but I'll try my best. So you can't prepare from on Shabbos, or if you can't prepare from on Shabbos for the next day, or from a Chag to the next, or from Shabbos to, you can't do something on Shabbos you can't do something, prepare something for something Motzei Shabbos or during the week on Shabbos. Like even washing dishes, unless it really grosses you out. But you can't generally do things, but especially cooking a meal. on Shabbos you can't cook a meal anyway. You can't use electricity, but on Yom Tov there is an exception. So what you do is, especially this Yom Tov, this Shavuot going to Shabbos, you need to prepare food for Shabbos, but you have to do it on Yom Tov. So what you do is, in order to allow that, you obviously leave the stove and that on a timer to prepare. So you cook an egg. I think it's an egg, or you put and you cook something small as a symbolic, something symbolic, and you put it in a location near you, like in a block of flats. I think that's what you do in order to, and then it allows you to, within the within the boundary of within 2,000 amot, I think, Damon, that allows you to prepare. You have to prepare something like an egg or something small and put it in a location not far from you. Then that allows you to prepare on Shabbos on the Yom Tov for Shabbos.
Okay, so it's very close. You're convoluting two issues. The one issue is an Eruv in terms of 2,000 amos limitation in terms of where you can eat. The other issue is a transition from Yom Tov into Shabbos. They're slightly two different issues, right, guys? So an Eruv Tafshilin, it's like a tongue twister for me. Kevin's amazing at pronouncing Hebrew. It basically is a mixing of cooked dishes, right? So, guys, you basically prepare cooked food prior to the Jewish holiday, and that's going to be followed by Shabbat. So normally cooking is allowed on major Jewish holidays, unlike Shabbat and Yom Kippur, where obviously it's forbidden, but only on consumption on that particular day. So you can't prepare for the next day, and not for consumption after the holiday. So it's different, obviously, if you've got 2 days of Yom Tov and Chutz La'aretz. So if say, for example, a holiday like Shavuot occurs on Thursday, and you're cooking for Shabbat, you're allowed to, according to Deraisa, technically do it, but according to Darabanan, it's forbidden. Why? Because it's meant to prevent confusion on other years. What do they mean? Is that like when the holiday doesn't immediately precede the Sabbath? If there's a day's break, for example. So unless this ritual of Erev Tavshilin is performed, you would tend to forget. So it's there to remind people of the reasons for the exception, or in a simple way, the facilitation continued from prior preparation. So basically, you do cooking of some baked foods for Shabbat before the holiday begins. You actually may have to make a joining of Shabbos Chag. So the food can consist of while Kevin says an egg, is some people cook an egg, but it's actually a kazait. That's the main thing of food. It could be cooked meat as well. But it's you add that to bread or matzah, depending on obviously if it's on Pesach or not, and a kazait amount of cooked food. So what you do is you have to set it aside. But the main thing is the food can't go off. So if it's no longer edible, you've got a problem. So in summer you have to put in the fridge, okay? And you have to do a brocha, and the food must be eaten on Shabbos, because the dishes or servings are mixed, meaning they're mixed from the time of preparation from the day before the holiday, before Shavuot, right? With the food that may be eaten on the day after the holiday, which will be Shabbos. So therefore it allows for cooking to take place on the holiday itself, which is not considered a new cooking, but it's rather continuation of the mixed cooking that already began before the holiday started. That's the whole point. That's the whole point.
But Damon, maybe, I'm sure some people just prepare before Yom Tov anyway and just warm it up on the platter, and instead of to negate this whole thing, they have already prepared food for the Chag, which then goes into Shabbos. So that will...
No, but you have to have a specific Avonin mindset. With this
even if you prepare food before?
Yeah.
Serious?
Yeah, because it's a very specific mindset to connect prior to the Chag to Shabbos.
Also, maybe if you prepare like a big dish, take a little bit of it and keep that as your Erev Tavshilin. On the same dish. Are you allowed to do that?
I don't know. I don't know if
like a meat lasagna, so you take a little pork kazayat of it and you keep that as your Erev Tavshilin, even though you prepared it and maybe
Yeah, look,
use that
some
as
people
a...
use the special challah as part of Shabbos, but just one thing, Arthur, not that you're going to be going to shul, whatever, but one generally should learn until about just after midnight. And the reason why you shouldn't learn throughout the night is it's derisive to get up for Shachrit, but it's only a minhag for Tikkun Leil because they didn't wake up early enough when the Torah was given. But the minhag shouldn't supersede halacha of getting up for Shachrit. So when I went to Or Aron, I remember at about 10 past 12, Rabbi Yoel Smith turned around and said, listen, I'm going to bed. I need to be up for Shachrit. Just so you know. All right. So guys, let's get through this. I hope.
Still on page 102, Damon.
No, actually we're on 103. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So look, there's an incident that's cited in the Gemara where Rav concurs with the sages of the West, the sages of Eretz Israel. So Rav Kahana gave money for flax and left the flax in the seller's possession. So what are we actually talking about here? Is that basically he paid for the flax now, and his intent was to take delivery at a later time juncture, right? So the Gemara assumes that Rav Kahana performed a proper kinyan on the flax. In other words, he did mashicha, which is drawing the object close to him so that he took title of it immediately and awaited only delivery. So that's the initial assumption. So eventually, guys, the flax appreciated in value, and the original owner of the flax sold it at a higher price with intent to give the proceeds to Rav Kahana. Okay. Now, Rav Kahana came before Rav and he said to him, what should I do? Should I go and take my money? In other words, Rav Kahana was concerned that his accepting the full amount of the money might have the appearance of taking ribos, interest. But basically, since the owner of the flax held his money as his representative for some time and was now returning money instead of merchandise, their transaction resembled a loan, just in terms of outside appearance. And since the amount returned was greater than the original amount, the additional funds could be perceived ribos. Okay, so it wasn't actual ribos, it was a case of marit ayin. Okay, so basically Rav said to him, if when they sold it, they said to the buyer, this flax is Rav Kahana's, go take the money. In other words, in that case, the buyer of the flax transferred the money directly to Rav Kahana, and it was from the buyer that Rav Kahana received the greater amount as payment for his appreciated flax. So the original owner of the flax, who had received the money from Rav Kahana, didn't pay him back a greater amount than was received, right? But merely forwarded him the buyer's payment. And there's no basis for this to be considered a ribos violation, because it's not as if it could be perceived that the intermediary was keeping the money for the loan. But if they didn't tell the buyer that it was Rabbi Kahana's flax, he wasn't allowed to take the additional money from the intermediary, the buyer. Why? As it would be considered a collection of interest. Because in this case, when the buyer paid for the flax, he intended to transfer the money from the original owner to the flax, and Rav Kahana didn't acquire it at the time. Okay? When the original owner gives it to Rav Kahana, a greater amount than he received from him originally, it's thought that the money is actually coming from him, and that appears like a ribos payment. I'm just going to go through it with you guys. So the Gemara says, whom does this accord? Seemingly it accords with those in the West, in other words, the sages of Eretz Israel, who said, who notified the owner of the wheat to transfer the wheat to the owner of the money? Meaning that Rav's ruling, guys, if you remember, was predicated on the assumption that if the buyers were not informed that the flax was Rav Kahana's, then what they paid for it, basically at that time period, they intended to transfer their money to the original owner. So regardless of whether or not they were informed, the fact is the flax did belong to Rav Kahana, and the original owner sold it on his behalf. So if we assume, as Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel Bar Sasrati did, that a seller always intends to transfer the item he sells to the owner of the money, it doesn't matter the one who conducts the transaction. In our case, it's the same. The buyer wanted to intend to transfer the money to the true owner, which is Rav Kahana. So even if he doesn't know that the flax belonged to Rav Kahana, according to Rav Shmuel Bas Sasrati and Rav Yochanan, his intention was to give the goods to the person that actually had the money, even if he didn't know who the original owner was. So even if he didn't know it was Rav Kahana, there's no ribos violation. So Rav ruled that the buyer was not notified that the additional payment is deemed ribos, must concur with the sages of Eretz Israel. So this is Rav agreeing with the sages of Eretz Israel. He said that a seller, unless notified otherwise, is basically intending to transfer the sale item to the one whom he's transacting with, right? So in our case, if the buyer was not notified that the flax belonged to Rav Kahana, he intended to transfer the money to the seller, and the original owner of who was the original owner of the flax. So when the owner of the flax subsequently gave the money to Rav Kahana, the payment appears like rivers. Okay. Now, basically, the Gemara rejects this situation. Why? Because if the incident occurred as assumed above, Rav Kahana actually owning the flax when it was sold, Rav wouldn't have restricted him from accepting the full value because it belonged to Rav Kahana. So we want to know, did Rav Kahana give the original owner the flax of the 4 zuzim, take back 8 in exchange, so that the additional funds should be considered interest, at least in terms of looking at it. So in the incident that was described, all he did was pay for the flax, and the flax then appreciated on its own. Okay. In other words, when Rav Kahana paid a lower price for the flax, it wasn't his intention to receive money in return, because then if he received a greater amount, it's considered interest, rivers. So you've got to assume that his intent was to acquire ownership of the flax immediately, and he was going to take delivery later. So although the flax was still physically located in the original owner's domain, it belonged fully to Rav Kahana, and the appreciation and its value accrued to him. Had he taken delivery of the appreciated flax himself, there's no issue, it wouldn't have been ribos, because then you're just dealing with goods. So basically, if Rav Kahana already owned the flax, then when the original owner sold it to him without permission, they robbed it from him. It's considered a robbery. And we learned in the Mishnah, all robbers pay at the time of the robbery. So the original owner is required to pay Rav Kahana what the flax was worth when he sold it, as if it was a payment for robbery. So that doesn't constitute a payment of interest, because there was never a loan in. So obviously, having refuted the original understanding, the Gemara offers another approach, according to which Rav's ruling is unrelated to the dispute between Rav Shmuel Bas Sasrati and the sages of the West. So they say it's basically an arrangement of trust. In other words, Rav Kahana advanced the seller money for future flax, but Rav Kahana didn't perform mashicha on the flax, in other words, to acquire it. So it wasn't technically on his property or part of his property. And Rav, who prohibited Rav Kahana to accept the profit from the sale unless the seller had notified the buyer that the flax was consigned to Rav Kahana, followed his own reasoning expressed elsewhere, because Rav said one may make an arrangement of trust for future delivery of a produce, but you can't make that arrangement of trust for repayment of future cash value of that produce. Okay, so guys, I want Arthur, give it back to me in terms of the concepts we're dealing with. I can see Arthur's laughing at this stage.
Damon, I've taken a steam tablet about half an hour ago. So
I know you so well. I can check.
But I'm getting up at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock your time. I have to be asleep by 10 o'clock.
No, I get it.
So I took it to the otherwise I'm not going to go to sleep tonight.
Okay, can you give over to me the concepts?
No. I heard like almost static, I'll be quite honest. My brain's like shut down already.
Okay.
I'm here, but I'm exhausted. I worked today all the way through. It wasn't hard work, but I worked.
Okay.
So,
Kevin, can you give it over?
I can give over a tiny fraction. I can't do it like. I think the thing with the interest, the ribis, I don't know how you say it.
Well, it's like Shabbos and Shabbat.
Yeah. Ribbit.
Pronunciation
I
is
think you can say
ribbit.
it either way. So
Yeah.
not as long as you don't say rabbit.
Rabbit, yeah.
Okay, so I think you're saying about the internet. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's is it with the if someone isn't liable for interest if they weren't actually financially involved, like a paid custodian. A paid custodian, maybe. Is that what you what is it any link to what you said?
No.
Okay,
Okay, what else did you get?
it's a lot of facts. No, I can't. With the flex, but with the sale of the flex and the sale of the flex at a higher price, maybe is that
Okay, so what are
maybe
the 5
Gavin?
issues?
Okay, what are the 5 issues?
Yeah.
I can't give. Maybe Gavin can give them.
Give me one of the issues.
Okay, the one issue is you can't make a profit. You can't show a profit. So when they said
Why not?
if you pay the
You can
price,
show profit in business. What do you mean?
Sorry, the reason why you can't charge more than what it is because it looks like you're charging them interest.
Not specific enough, Bertie.
Okay, sorry. Close luck, I guess. I can't mistake. Okay.
Okay, Gav,
Maybe Gavin can give it a go.
one of the
No,
5.
no, I'm not in great shape. I pretty much picked up what these guys picked up, so I didn't not great either.
All right, so let's build step by step. Okay. Thank God I never gave this dedication in terms of my late grandmother. She would have been horrified. I had a feeling to wait until there was the Mishnayos, which is the next session. Just my gut. Okay. So, all right, guys, let me unpack it for you step by step. All right. So you've got Rav Kahana, and he's asking a question from Rav. Okay. Now, there are 2 opinions. There's the opinion of Rav Yochanan, who agrees with Rav Shmuel Bar Sasrati, or should I say Rav Shmuel Bar Sasrati, who is under Rav Yochanan, agrees with Rav Yochanan. Now, you must know that Rav Yochanan was the head of the generation in Eretz Israel. Okay? So Rav Sasrati adhered to Rav Yochanan. So that was one opinion. But there was a different opinion with the sages of the West, which is the sages of Eretz Israel. So you could say, how could they disagree? If he was the head Rov, and there's the sages of Eretz Israel, but he was the Rov of Eretz Israel, how could they disagree? Because if he was the head. So the answer is very simple. They came at different generations. And on certain issues, they didn't agree. So that's the first concept. So let me tell you what that concept is. So according to the sages of Eretz Israel, if you remember, Rav Yochanan explained the position of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda in the previous Mishnah. And the sages of Eretz Israel disagreed with Rav Yochanan. Now, what was this principle on one of the issues? We were talking about the first brisa and the second brisa, as you know, and we had, consensus with regards to, is it both the opinions of Rabbi Meir, etc., etc. In other words, is that when somebody decided as an agent and worked with an investor to go on their own tangent and buy their own produce, if there's a loss, the agent always suffers it, even according to the first or second brisa. And in the second brisa, if there was a appreciation and a profit, it went both to the investor as well as the agent. Why? Because according to Rav Yochanan, who holds like, who said that Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that the business partner at the end of the day invested and just wants to show a profit. According to Rabbi Meir, that when the agent went of his own volition and brought his own produce, that differed from the venture capitalist, that he basically was like a robber because he has to repay the original owner for the the cash equivalent for the money that was lent to him, and whether the agent loses money or gains money, he's on his own at that point. And that was Rav Yochanan explaining Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rav Elazar said it could both be the opinions of Rabbi Meir, where if the agent differed, but he was doing a service for the homeowner, and he differed from by making a desk instead of a cabinet, obviously the homeowner isn't interested, so the agent has to just refund the money. If it's a commercial endeavor, but he differed in the products that he bought, the investor still gets a share according to Rabbi Meir, for the simple reason that the investor is only interested in making a profit. But if there's a loss and a deviation, it's for the agent to bear the loss because he deviated from instructions. But what came up is this thing with Rabbi Shmuel Bas Fasrati and Rav Yochanan agreeing that it doesn't matter if the person that sold it to them is aware that there's a private or secret investor, because at the end of the day, he just wants to make a profit. And the sages of the West turn around and say, well, if someone's acting as your agent, you should know that the agent is in fact an agent and who he's working on behalf of, in order for the cognizance of the person selling to the agent to know that he's working on behalf of somebody that's employing his agency. And that at the end of the day, that if the person's deviating from his instructions, in that particular case, that the sale is null and void, because the original owner of the money didn't ask the agent to deviate, and therefore, if he doesn't act with the will of the person that's hiring him as the agent, there's no transaction that takes place. So this is all stemming on that argument between sages of the West that say that when somebody sells you goods, they have to be cognizant of who's actually paying the money. Is it the agent, or is the agent working on behalf of the investor? As far as Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel Bas Fasrati is concerned, is it doesn't have any make any difference. The person wants to sell the goods. He doesn't care who's paying him the money. So this is the issue at which this discussion of Rav Kamma and Rav formulate on. Because what's happening now is that Rav Kamma is paying an agent. Okay, so what's he paying the agent for? Well, it's pretty straightforward. Is that he wants to buy flax, and he left flax in the seller's possession. So what are we actually talking about here? Is that there are ebbs and flows in terms of what the market value of flax is worth, Arthur. Sham, if you're not feeling well, you can lie down, but seriously, I don't want you to feel ill.
No, I'm just trying to stay awake, which I'm sitting up.
Okay. Okay. So what we are saying here is, Rav Kamma, there are certain times when you buy a product, because if it's an agricultural product, the prices in the year when it's low, and there's certain prices when it's higher. If you're busy harvesting and there's a glut in the market, you obviously can buy low and you store it and you sell higher. So Rav Kamma has given money for flax that he bought now, but he wants delivery at a later date. So initially, the Gemara's got this assumption that Rav Kamma performed a proper kinyan on the flax. So why does it matter if he did a kinyan, which is Mashiach, he drew the flax next to him? The reason it matters is that if he took title of the flax immediately and awaited only delivery, there's not a question of ribos, Arthur, because what it means is that you went to the store and you bought goods and you acquired them. Now, there's two different types of acquisitions. The one acquisition is paying money, but you also have to do a kinyan to take possession of the object. So kinyan is like, you can think of it, Arthur, of taking delivery. So the one is paying the money, that affects legal transfer, but it has to come on condition that you have the object delivered. Because if you send money across, Arthur, and you don't get the money, if you don't get the goods for the money, at the end of the day, you've been robbed, yes or no? Arthur, you pay for a car and they don't deliver the car. Do you acquire the car? Well, you need the license papers, that's a kinyan. You need the license papers in your name, and you need the car delivered. Otherwise, it's robbery. So what the issue is here is initially it's assumed from the Gemara that the car was delivered to Rav Kahana and the car papers are in his name. That's what it means by Mashiach. Okay, and that in that particular case, if he made money by selling the car again, it's not considered as though it's ribos. So let me explain to you, Arthur, what ribos means. Ribos is interest earned from a loan. So if you lend somebody 1,000 shekels and they give you 1,200 shekels back and they give you 20% interest, that is prohibited by Jewish law. If you bought goods for 1,000 shekels and you did a commercial endeavor where you either sold it to a business or private endeavor where you sold goods to an individual and made a profit, at 1,200 shekels, there is no problem with that. The problem is that you can't make a profit on lending money because Jews are not allowed to take advantage of other Jews that need money by making it a profitable endeavor. So that's the issue of ribos. So what we are saying is here is if Rav Kahana gives money to a seller to sell flax for him, then what happens is if the seller made money by selling the flax and he made a profit, it looks as though Rav Kahana is charging interest. Why? Because the oak didn't have any money. So he's giving him the money for the deal. The guy makes a profit and he gives Rav Kahana back exactly what Rav Kahana gave him. That's an interest-free loan. That's allowed. But the minute he gives him cash back that's higher than the amount he gave, it looks as though he charged this seller interest and that this Rav Kahana is a venture capitalist. He's not allowed to earn interest on cash. Why? Because it's different if they had a business arrangement where they went into together, they bought products together and they sold it. In this case, it looked like the agent was making his profit, but he needed the cash flow of Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana was profiting from it. So because the perception was he was earning interest when ribos is prevented, then there's a bit of a problem. Because if he took possession, if he got at a lower price flax from the agent and then sold, this agent sold it on Rav Kahana's behalf, and Rav Kahana made a profit on the flax, there's no problem. But then Rav Kahana needed to have acquired the flax by doing Mashiach to actually have possession of the flax. In other words, even if he didn't store the flax in his property, but he went to the other guy's home and he basically drew it near, gave him the money, then it's his flax, Rav Kahana. The other guy's only storing it for him. So there's no problem if the other agent is selling it on Rav Kahana's behalf. He sells it to a buyer. The buyer is aware that it's Rav Kahana's because the seller made him aware. And the fact of it is he did a kinyan on it of Mashiach. Then it's not perceived as interest. It's merely perceived as Rav Kahana making money when the price of flax went up. But the whole issue here is a perception that he lent a guy money because the guy needed to deal a deal, and Rav Kahana earned interest on that money of the loan. And that's why Rav says there's a problem. And that's what we were going through in the Gemara. You get what I'm saying? So I'm just setting up the base points. Okay, so Rav Kahana gave money for flax and left the flax in the seller's possession. So that is, guys, he paid for the flax now with the intent to take delivery at a later date. And there was an initial assumption that a kinyan, proper kinyan had been made. So even if it was in possession of Rav Kahana's seller that was going to sell him on Rav Kahana's behalf and left in the property of the seller, it's fine if there was a proper kinyan, but there wasn't. So eventually, flax appreciated in value, and the original owner of the flax sold it at a higher price with the intent of giving the proceeds to Rav Kahana. So in other words, the person sold it at the higher price and the proceeds belonged to Rav Kahana. But Rav Kahana wasn't sure what to do, so he went before Rav and he said, should I go and take my money? In other words, Rav Kahana was basically concerned that if he accepted the full amount of money, it might have had the appearance to other Jews that he was earning interest. Because since the owner of the flax held his money for quite a period of time, and was now returning money when he should have returned flax. In other words, he was returning money instead of merchandise. Their transaction resembled a loan because he was lent money, he got back more money. And since the amount returned was greater than the original amount, the additional funds could be perceived as ribos. It wasn't actual ribos because we know the situation. So,
Nice, yeah.
so
Okay.
what happens was Rav said to Rav Kahana, if when they sold it, they said to the buyer, this flax is Rav Kahana's, you can go take the money. So what does he mean by that? In other words, in this case, if the buyer of the flax transferred the money directly to Rav Kahana's account, and it was from the buyer that Rav Kahana received the great amount, that's payment for a business transaction of the fact that is flax appreciated in value, merchandise. So the original owner of the flax, who had received the money from Rav Kahana, didn't pay him back a greater amount than he received. But all he did was forward to him the buyer's payment. Even if it was the buyer's payment and the buyer didn't pay Rav Kahana directly even, but the buyer was informed that the money belonged to Rav Kahana to start with, there's no basis to be considered a ribos violation because this person, the seller, was very well aware, the buyer was very well aware that the seller was working on behalf of Rav Kahana, and therefore it wasn't as if the seller was a free agent and taking money from Rav Kahana, and Rav Kahana earned back more. Do you get what I'm saying? So two things had to take place. Either the person now buying the flax at the higher price had to be aware that the seller said that actually he was selling it on behalf of Rav Kahana, and that the money either go directly to Rav Kahana, or that at least the buyer was aware that it was Rav Kahana's, and that there was no ribos, that this guy was borrowing money from Rav Kahana and then selling goods and then giving back a high interest on the money loan. So there was no misperception of ribos. And that was what Rav said to me. He said, listen, if the buyer's aware of that this flax belonged to Rav Kahana, no problem. You can go and take the cash, even though you should get flax you've given. But if the buyer has no awareness, it's a problem. But then we're saying, who does this Gemara occur with? It seems to occur with the rabbis of the West, because it goes to that argument, who notified the owner of the wheat to transfer wheat to the owner of the money? Meaning, that seems to be in line with the sages of Eretz Israel, that Rav is agreeing with them. Because if it was actually going in accordance with Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel bar Sasrati, it wouldn't matter if the person buying the flax knew that it was a seller or Rav Kahana. It wouldn't have made any difference, because at the end of the day, he just wants to basically sell it, buy it, or irrespective. Or if he's a seller, he just wants to basically sell his good. He doesn't care who's involved in the project. So this seems to go with the sages of the West. So, guys, we've got 1 minute. I just want to do one thing. Kevin, just hang on a second, and it'll take a few minutes, then we're done.
Why are we doing a share tomorrow?
Yes,
Because
but just one thing, Kev, one thing. Okay, so guys, the very fact that the person that's buying the flax is aware that it belongs to Rav Kahana, and that the seller has acting as an agent that bought the flax on behalf of Rav Kahana and selling it to this buyer, is an integral part at why Rav Kahana can take the profit. Okay, and therefore it accords with the sages of the West. That does not accord, it seems, to Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel bar Sasrati, because they say, who cares if the other party knows that the agent is selling it on behalf of Rav Kahana? Okay, so this seems to be a proof on the previous Gemara with the sages in the West. Okay, because this is basically the point, right? Is that Rav's ruling is predicated on the assumption that if the buyers were not informed that the flax was Rav Kahana's, then what they paid for it and when they paid for it makes a difference, because they actually intended to transfer their money to the original owner. Now, regardless of whether or not they were informed, the fact of it is the flax did belong to Rav Kahana.
Sunstream with the water.
Let's wait for Arthur. Arthur, well, I want to know if you're following Semi.
I am half asking a question about you wanted some apple juice. That was the reason why.
All right, are you with me now?
Not really. I'm still kind of dozing.
All right, well, are you at least hearing me at the moment, or have you got distractions?
I can hear you. I just don't absorb anything at the
No,
moment.
that's fine.
I'll
You
have
can
to-
show me hears me, but you got to at least hear me, even if you don't understand. So basically,
Well, I'm answering you. That's okay.
Arthur, what it means is whether or not the buyer was informed that the flax belonged to Rav Kahana, it still did. Okay. So, in other words, according to Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel Bas Srati, the seller always intends to transfer the item he sells to the owner of the money. He doesn't even have to be cognizant of who they are, because at the end of the day, he just cares that he gets the money. And therefore, the default position is that he is cognizant, because whoever put in the money, yeah, they get the goods. According to the rabbis of the West, the Eretz Yisrael, they need to know exactly the person in the transaction, who's involved with the money. Okay, so in our case, the buyer similarly intends to transfer the money to the true owner, Rav Kahana, and that's according to Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel Bas Srati, right? But according to the rabbis, it's not good enough that that is an intention. They have to be aware and notified that the flax belongs to Rav Kahana, because then there's no rebus violation, because all they know is that the buyer then knows that he's bought flax from Rav Kahana. If that doesn't happen, then what happens is in other words, since Rav ruled that the buyer wasn't notified that the additional payment is deemed ribus, he's got to agree with the sages of the West, because he deems that a seller, unless otherwise notified, intends to transfer the sale of the item to the one whom he's transacting. Now, there's a problem here, because in our case, if Rav occurs with the sages of the West, then what happens is the buyer doesn't even know that the flax belongs to Rav Kahana. So therefore, there's an issue. And that issue is that it seems as though that the person was lent money to do their own financial transaction, and Rav Kahana made profit on the cash, in other words, the loan. So the Gemara rejects that suggestion, because it says, look, if the incident occurred as assumed above, Rav Kahana actually owned the flax when it was sold, Rav wouldn't have restricted him from accepting the full value. In other words, the whole issue now becomes something different. It becomes a case of the fact that did Rav Kahana do mashicha in terms of acquisition, apart from the money transfer? So we're seeing this is the problem, actually. Because it said, did Rav Kahana give the original owner of the flax 4 zuzim and take back 8 in exchange? In other words, that the additional fund should be considered interest. So in other words, it says in the Gemara, the incident you described is very straightforward. He paid for flax. Flax appreciated on its own. What do we mean that it appreciated on its own? It's that basically when Rav Kahana paid a low price for the flax, it wasn't his intention to receive money for the flax, because if he received a greater value, that's considered ribus on a loan. So his intent was that he was going to acquire actual ownership of a physical commodity, flax, but he was going to take delivery later. In other words, he paid for it, and he wasn't intending to get money back. He actually wanted goods, but he wanted it delivered later so that it would fetch a greater price, but he wanted to pay the lower price. So although the flax was still physically located in the original owner's domain, the person Rav Kahana, was buying flax from, because he hadn't taken delivery from it, it actually fully belonged to Rav Kahana. And then the appreciation occurred not as a result of interest, but because there was a market fluctuation and it became a scarcity instead of a glut. And had he taken delivery of the appreciated flax himself, it wouldn't have constituted ribos. So I tell you what it's equivalent to. It's equivalent to that you buy petrol, and South Africa does what it does, and the petrol price goes up. But you were quite happy to have the petrol delivered to you in 20-litre drums, 4 20-litre drums, okay, and take advantage of the fact is the ANC was having an election, and they said, we are now going to sell petrol at a lower price because we've solved the petrol problem, and everybody votes for the ANC for 2 weeks. So in the meantime, it's equivalent of me buying petrol at that lower price, and then I've paid for it. Now, I want the petrol delivered now or later. It doesn't make a difference. I just want the petrol at the lower price. If they deliver it at a later price, I don't want my money on the improved petrol. All I want is the petrol. So that's what we're saying. Rav Kahana didn't need his money. He was actually quite happy just to get the flax delivered at a later date when it was more financially conducive. Okay? If Rav Kahana already owned the flax, then when the original owner sold it to him without his permission, then they robbed it from him. In other words, what we're saying is Rav Kahana had the flax. He bought it from the farmers, but what happened is the farmers didn't deliver it to him. They were meant to. Then, if they didn't deliver it to him, they robbed him. And then we learn in the Mishnah, all robbers pay at the time of the robbery. Okay, so what does that mean? They pay their victims the amount the stolen property was worth exactly at the timeline that they stole it. Right. So thus the original owner is required to pay Rav Kahana whatever the flax was worth when he sold it as payment for his robbery, and that doesn't constitute a payment of interest since there was never a loan. So what the Gemara is actually saying is, look, since Rav Kahana flax had appreciated by the time the original owner stole it from him. In other words, the original owner got the money from Rav Kahana, was meant to deliver Rav Kahana's flax, and then when he stole it, it's as if he stole its full value from Rav Kahana, and is required to pay that amount as restitution. Why? Because Rav Kahana wanted it delivered perhaps at a later date, but he wanted the goods. So it's irrelevant whether the buyer intended to transfer the funds to the original owner in accordance to the sages of the West. We intended to transfer it to Rav Kahana directly. And that would be in accordance with Rav Yochanan Rav Shmuel Bas Sasrati. Even if he transferred the money to the original owner of the flax, the person's original subsequent payment of the 8 zuzim to Rav Kahana isn't ribos, because he's not paying the 8 zuzim in lieu of 4 zuzim that he received from him. In other words, it's not compensating Rav Kahana for a loan. It's actually paying Rav Kahana back for the robbery of his flax, because this person was entitled to deliver the flax to Rav Kahana, not take his money and sell the flax to somebody else. So since that person robbed him and did it at 8 zuzim, then even if Rav held with the sages of the West, he shouldn't have prohibited Rav Kahana from taking additional money, because it was actually payment in terms of a stolen money. So the Gemara clears it up. It says, okay, if you've refuted the original understanding of the incident, let the Gemara take another approach, to which Rav ruling is unrelated to the dispute between Rav Shmuel Bas Sasrati and the sages of the West. In other words, it's saying, listen, this has nothing to do with whether or not the buyer was cognizant that the seller was working on his own behalf with Rav Kahana. It doesn't matter, because it's an issue of if it was robbery, Rav Kahana is entitled to the greater amount, because that's what it was worth at the time that he was robbed. So we're saying it's a completely different issue. There's not a dispute with that issue in the Gemara before. So what we are saying is it's a completely different case. This is about an arrangement of trust, Kevin. In other words, Rav Kahana gave the money for future flax. He advanced the seller money, and he said, I want you to buy flax for me. But the problem was Rav Kahana didn't perform Mashiach on the flax. Okay? So what we're saying is Mashiach is this process, Gavin, of drawing near. And it's a legal kinyan. It's an act of acquisition for movable objects. So anybody who buys something movable doesn't acquire the title just by paying for it, but by drawing it into its domain. It's in Kedushin 26a. In other words, it's not just about paying for the car. You've got to get the license papers done, Gavin, in your name. Otherwise, if somebody's driving you, if you're driving your car and it's not in your name, or somebody else is driving it, then do you even own it? So in other words, when Rav Kahana paid for the flax, the seller didn't have it in his possession, and Rav Kahana was unable to perform a legal kinyan on it. In other words, what Rav Kahana should have done is when he paid for it, he should have made sure that the person immediately had the flax and gone to his premises and drew it near to him so that he had a kinyan on it, an act of acquisition, even if it was stored in this in the person that Rav Kahana bought it from, in his place. At least it belonged to Rav Kahana. The fact of it is he should have even taken it to his premises. So the intent was not for him to acquire ownership of anything at the time. That's why Rav Kahana had a question with Rav. Rav Kahana said, look, I trust this person. This person didn't rob from me. I've given an advance of money and based on trust. And it was based on the prevailing market price of flax at that time. At the time that I paid for it, that was the price. And the understanding was throughout the year, the seller would acquire the flax and deliver it to Rav Kahana for the price. In other words, Rav Kahana wanted to pay the lowest amount for the flax. This is important. He wanted to, so he bought it at the most opportune time where it was the lowest price. The person didn't steal it from him. He gave this guy trust, and he said, here's an advance payment, buy it at this low price. God did. But what happened is, even though the understanding was it could be delivered with whatever, it was a fixed price as though you bought shares on the stock exchange at a low price. So Rav Kahana benefited from the arrangement because the price of flax, as you know, guys, fluctuates with the seasons. He paid a lower price. He wanted it delivered and fixed at the lowest price, irrespective of when it would be delivered. But if it was delivered at a later date, it's still fine. But the seller benefited. Okay? So why did the seller benefit? Because at the end of the day, the seller benefited from the arrangement because he was obligated to deliver flax in the expensive season for the lower price. So you're saying, well, how does that help? We understand how Rav Kahana benefited because he bought it for the lowest price. But how did the seller benefit from the arrangement if it obligated him to deliver flax at a later date for the lower price? Because he could have earned more on the flax selling it at a higher price. Because the fact of it is the seller didn't have money. And Rav Kahana's money during the period between payment and delivery gave the seller great cash flow. So when the arrangement was made, is that it benefited Rav Kahana because he bought the flax at the lowest price. It benefited the seller of the flax because in effect, what happened is he got cash flow and could use Rav Kahana's money. And this is, and then the seller compensated Rav Kahana by delivering it at a higher price, so Rav Kahana made money. So what this actually means, guys, is that this is why it looks kind of like a loan and it's a bit dodgy, okay, even though it wasn't. So that's why I asked Rav, because it looks as though he made money on loaning money because the seller was using his money at the time as well, and it benefited both parties. So although it borders on ribis, it's in Bava Kamma 72b, it's actually not ribis. So the reason why it's allowed is because it teaches in Bava Kamma 72b that basically it's permitted once a market price has been established for the flax. So in other words, if you're buying it and you've paid the money and you're not doing it for money, but you actually bought goods, boom, you've made your payment on the shares in the stock exchange, you've bought it. So you're advancing money to the seller who doesn't own any flax with the stipulation that he's going to deliver flax at this rate on a future date, even though the price may be higher. Now, it should be that the seller is actually using your money and he's buying the flax at the lowest price. Okay, the fact that it's not considered rebus is because since there's not a scarcity in the market for flax, the seller has the ability to buy it immediately at the low price. So he's not viewed as basically returning anything more than he received, guys. That's in 62b. The fact that he chose to keep money to help his cash flow was his own choice. He could have bought the flax immediately at that price. So when Rav Kahana gave the seller an advance payment, the market price of flax, A, had been established, and B, there was sufficient flax in the market that could be bought, and they were allowed to enter into this arrangement. It wasn't a loan. So the person that received the advance payment from Rav Kahana was obligated to deliver the flax to Rav Kahana on a designated date. And he could have bought the flax immediately and there was no problem. He decided to keep the money in order to make use of the cash flow. So when the time arrived later, he didn't deliver the flax to Rav Kahana, but instead sold it at a higher rate. And he said, look, I've sold it. I've made a bit of a profit, Rav Kahana. Here are the proceeds in lieu of the sale of the flax that I was able to deliver to you. And that's the problem, because what should have happened is, according to Rav, you can make an arrangement of trust for future delivery of produce, but you can't make an arrangement of trust for repayment of future cash value of that produce, because that's bordering on the perception of rebus as opposed to getting produce delivered at a later date. And that's the bottom line of the share. All right, I'm done. After it's finished, this has knocked him out.
I think he was finished.
7 o'clock.